So as this montage is intended to illustrate, I've been traipsing all over Canada, along with Cedar and Aspen, my daughters, for the last several years, trying all the V4s. And so what I want to do here is I want to collate all that information and give what I think are the top 20 V4 boulders in Canada. For the criteria for inclusion, check out the video description, and I hope you find it interesting, perhaps even useful. World's greatest boulder problem in Squamish is indeed an excellent problem. Certainly not the world's best or world's greatest, but still a really nice one. Now, I didn't climb this one because it's kind of highballish and I had an injury. But Cedar, fortunately, was willing to come down off her V6s and V7s to send it for me on her off day. She flashed it without much difficulty, but she made the starting moves a lot harder than she had to with her open crimps and a Gaston on a pretty bad hold, as you'll see me laughing about here with her in a second.
I can't believe you Gaston on the little bottom of that. You made that way harder than it had to be.
Ripple in Niagara is a really nice extended boulder problem. Almost like a root, really. The main thing here is the pump. And of course it's hard to practice the upper moves because they're so high up. Now I didn't try this one again because it was kind of highballish, but Cedar several years ago was willing to get on it and move her way up. This wasn't her flash attempt, this was her second go, but there's a lot of having to work around figuring out what the right holds are, and so she actually took quite a bit of time to get up this one. Now with Niagara, there's a ton of problems there, and it's one of the best bouldering sites in Canada, but it's kind of hard for me to put problems from there on a best of list or a top 20 list, primarily because there's so few top outs. Now this one has kind of a mini top out, which you'll see at the top. So you can sort of top it out, then you have to down climb on that rail there. But most of the problems have so much vegetation on the top, including tons of poison ivy, that you don't really top them out. You just have a drop-off hold. In fact, top outs are expressly forbidden on many of the problems in Niagara, unless the guidebook says otherwise. And that means that there's very few mantles and very few things where you feel like you've actually completely topped out the route. So as a result, there's not a lot of Niagara problems in this top 20 list.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, now just chill for a second.
That's top out.
Choosing this one for a top 20 list is probably going to surprise some folks who know the area. The reason is that the start is obnoxious, but I figured out that cool bicycle toe heel hook at the start there, which actually made it quite pleasant. This starting approach, which is so nice, actually works quite well for short people also. It's actually an eliminate. You're supposed to avoid the lip until the very peak of the boulder there. And you might also think that an eliminate would sort of rule it out, but the movements here are super nice. It's these slopers you have to move between and heel hooks on your way up, and it actually took me a number of sessions to send it. When I finally did send it, it was actually really easy. Conditions were just right, and I knew my beta exact. You can easily guess that some top 100 type problems are going to end up in this top 20 list. And a really good candidate was Trad Killer. The start is a little bit hard, but after that it's a series of really nice movements that Cedar here is demonstrating from a number of years ago. I also climbed this one, but don't have a good video of it. Now, there are a lot of top 100s from Squamish that did not make my top 20 list. For example, shots fired is just a horrible problem.
I'm gonna take another picture. You're not spotted.
So there's a couple of top 100s on this list. You'll see a few more later, but not as many as you might think. And I've got some other Squamish ones that really should be top 100s instead of the ones that currently are. Val-David in Quebec is my home crag. So I've done pretty much all the V4s there. There's a few I haven't been able to send, but I've certainly tried them all. La Tortue is one of my favorites. And it's really finicky because at the top you have horrible positioning. And you either have to dyno to the top or you have to find this little tiny catch on the surface up above you. Well, it took me a number of sessions to figure it out, and finally I just sort of did this crazy tall person little mini dyno off horrible feet at the end. But it's really cool because although it's high, you always fall in exactly the same place, and if you got your pad set up, it's super safe even though it's a bit of a high ball. This is going to be probably the second most obscure boulder in this top 20 list. It's not in any guidebook. It's just in online topos. And it's in Morin-Heights in Quebec. A really, really awesome area. I struggle to find words what the shape of the boulder is actually like. It's not a fridge, but there's not a shape in nature or of any sort of design that I know is anything like this. But it makes for this really, really unique thing. Now, the top out is pretty desperate, but I wanted to add a second video in here by Chris Altura sending it because my beta was a very tall person beta with only a few really large moves. And I've heard other people talk about how this particular boulder, if you're short, requires a huge number of individual moves. And so Chris is demonstrating that here. Takes a while to figure out your exact beta. And then once you get up on the top, you've got the same sort of top-out whale kind of problem here because there's not much to grab. Takes a bit to find this boulder, and there's some other really, really good boulders nearby, so I highly recommend it. Again, it's Morin-Heights in Quebec, and the specific sector is Viking West. If you can't find it, you can always send me a message and I'll hook you up.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah! Yeah! You know what, dude? That's basically my beta.
Calabogie in Ontario has a huge number of very diverse V4 problems, which makes it really great as a V4 climber. The reality, however, is that most of the individual problems aren't exceptionally high quality. This one is an exception. It's November, and it has a series of really awesome moves. And I love, for me anyway, this knee bar here at the top, which enables reaching up and establishing to get this little crack crimp up here. The first time I got up on the top, I didn't really know what to do, and that was why I fell off, which was the little clip at the very start of this video. This is surely the most obscure V4 in this top 20 countdown. It's from a relatively small but really high quality area called Petropolis, which is in Gowland-Todd Provincial Park near Victoria. This particular problem starts with this massive span, and then you have to do some clever footwork to get your way up. I should note my left hand is starting a slightly further position than I've seen in other videos. What I loved here was this back flag move, which without it, I just couldn't make the move to that little tiny crimper on the face there and then up. If you're in the Victoria area, I highly recommend the Petropolis boulders. It's a bit of a walk, but it's a beautiful walk, and there's a bunch of really high quality stuff there. I spent a ton of time this last year in the Boulderfields near Kelowna, and this problem in the Northfields, it's quite an approach to get to, was recommended to me by Quentin Trollope, and it was really spectacular problem. I love it. Big movements. The heel toe cam there, if you'll see, is how I could do that big move. And then when I got to the top, I think the typical thing would be to do a top out sort of leftish, but I had no pads over there anymore. It's not the best landings, and so I went up the safer, if less elegant, right hand side of the top out there. Trapdoor is not a top 100 in Squamish according to the book, but it should be. Lots and lots of people climb it. It's a really wonderful series of movements, including that heel hook there. The top out's a bit tricky, so you actually have to pay attention to it, as you'll see toward the end here. Really awesome problem that's very accessible. The difficult thing for me was deciding how to start with my right hand, because if you're tall, you get pretty cramped up there. And so I kept pushing my right hand higher and higher until eventually it was sort of above the arete itself, and I sent it that way last year. But then I realized that that's not the appropriate thing. I need my hand lower on the arete, and so I went back and redid it. This year, my hand is still higher on the arete than I expect most people would put it, but it's definitely still within the range of what this problem's supposed to be. Awesome problem. Back in Val-David for one of the most unique boulder problems out there. This incredible, sharp, but rounded proue called La Proue. It's a very short problem, but really wonderful series of movements. Cedar here is showing how people usually start it with sort of a crouch start. And that's kind of like the typical way to start it. As you'll see in a minute, I think that probably the crouch start was not the original intent, but that the ground has sunk from all the compression. This is one of the most popular areas. There's tons of people that walk there, and it's probably quite compressed now. So I went back a year or two later and decided to try and do it as a crouch, as an actual sit start. So here you see me doing it as a sit start. The reality is I've got like stacked pads there a little bit, just a tiny bit so I can reach the proue. And so I think there's a much better and more enjoyable way to do this problem, and probably the original intent, but because of the sinking ground, you probably need to put a little bit of stacking pads there in order to be able to reach the proue. Anyway, this is a super unique problem that everyone in Val-David loves.
This was sketchy.
This is probably the most popular V4 in Niagara. Partly also because you can climb it when it's quite wet, since there's an overhanging cliff there. It's pretty highballish, and I'm usually injured, so I didn't actually climb this one, but convinced Cedar to do it. She sent a V6 called Threesome just to the right there, but she was willing to hop on this one. I was noting earlier that you can't do top outs in most places in Niagara, and so you can see that here. And again, that's why you don't see a lot of Niagara boulders in this countdown list, because you kind of need top out. I have very few crimper problems in this top 20 list. Crimps don't really suit me, partly because of my weight, but partly also because I'm quite old and it's hard on the fingers. So I really like instead problems with these big movements between like cool, interesting holds. And this is one of the best, Ghostface in Duncan. I just really like this problem. It's quite long, so it's not a route per se, but definitely the pump was a major factor for me here. I couldn't send it on my first session, but once I figured out the moves, it went on my second try on the second session. The hardest, or at least the most annoying, single move on this was the very first one. And so I've got a video showing how I did a start for that made it much more repeatable. So I basically start with my feet established, just do a touch match there, and then move into the problem. The approach to these boulders is quite long as well, maybe about, I don't know, 45 minutes an hour, and a bit of a slog, but it's so worth it. Oh man, this one's so good. Pumpkin pie in the Boulderfields. It really probably should be higher on this list, but I didn't want to put all the Boulderfields problems way up in the very top of this list. That move right there, up to that crimper, is the hardest one in the problem. For a number of sessions and attempts, I kept trying that one again and again, and this is where I got the closest to sending the problem using this original beta right here. But I just couldn't hang on to the spin there. That hold is also very sharp, and it was cutting my fingers and potentially going to ruin the rest of my trip. So I switched to an alternative beta that you'll see here, which is to just do a massive move with a heel hook, skipping that crimper altogether. I didn't want to do it originally because there's a bit of a scary drop-off behind this, and I was really afraid of hurting myself. But in the end, I was getting close to my last day, and I was just decided to go for it. Risky, but worked out. This is probably the most famous boulder in the V4 level in all of Canada. Partly because it was on the original Chris Sharma Rampage video. I'm first showing the send by Cedar because she always has a more elegant send than I do. This is from when she was quite a bit younger. The trick on this problem is the top out, for at least for someone short. And it's really kind of spooky, and the guidebook says that there's been a lot of broken ankles or rolled ankles here. So it's kind of spooky and tricky, the top out. The next video I'm going to show is me doing it, and in my case, the harder part was the bottom, bizarrely. But I found out a cool knee bar version where I could get in here and shorten up the whole thing with a little lock off where I could reach all the way up to the lip. Now, once I got to the lip, my height was a massive advantage because I could sort of leave my feet relatively low and just reach to really good holds before mantling up on the top. And that really sort of made it possible for me to do without worrying about hurting myself too much here. Anyway, it's a really, really cool problem. Well-deserved top 100 Squamish. Definitely a must-do within the grade range. So I figure every top 20 list should have a crack climbing problem. And so we've got one here because there's a really good V4 crack climb boulder in Val-David. I worked on it for a number of sessions called La Craque de Fesses, and I figured out a really cool beta. But the day I sent it, it was really wet, which kind of feels like I did the essence of a crack boulder in its natural state, which is wet often. But I was able to figure it out with this really funky set of movements here. Now, the truth is, it's probably harder than V4 if you don't actually jam the crack, but V4 if you do actually jam the crack. So most people, really strong climbers, won't bother with jamming, and they'll just use their finger strength. But at V4, for me, jamming it properly as an actual crack climb was the way to get it done. Awesome. Another incredible Boulderfields V4. This is Cave Dweller. Now the footage I'm showing here is actually shot after I sent it because I wanted to show my beta, which is different from most here. And it also just shows the unique nature of the holds on this problem and the particular movements you can use. So it took me a while to figure out the beta. Again, a couple sessions on this one, but then when I figured it out, it went pretty smoothly. The lighting conditions were really bad, like really dark underneath and really light up above, so I've kind of manipulated it so you can see the entire boulder here. This whole area of the Boulderfields is really nice to climb in a hot day because it's very well shaded. And so even in the hottest weather, when other parts of the Boulderfields are really not climbable at all, the Cave Dweller area is still one of the most climbable areas. Have to admit, I was also drawn to this boulder because I had made one called Troglodyte, which means Cave Dweller, before I even saw this boulder. This could be the most aesthetic looking boulder and climbing boulder in the entire collection here. It's just absolutely spectacular. Again, in Duncan, and this was my very first day there, my very first boulder I climbed, and I climbed it pretty quickly. I think for someone of my height, it's pretty soft at the V4 level, but it's just such a wonderful boulder with such amazing movements. I just absolutely thought it was one of the best I've ever done. Now, bizarrely, the hard part, or at least the awkward and ugly part, was the top out here, and I just really did it twice. I did the boulder twice because I wanted to do a more clean top out the second time, but I just couldn't do a clean top out either time. So it's not difficult, it's just ugly on the top out. I'm sure someone who was shorter or, I don't know, stronger could have a much cleaner top out than I did. The first time I tried this boulder, this happened. I cut myself up pretty badly and basically quit because you need spotters. The next year, Cedar and I drove by and saw someone working on it, and so in the beautiful sunset, decided to give it another go. Now, it's just got really amazing movements in a really amazing place. It's just a spectacular thing. The top out's the hard part, and in fact, I totally punt on it here. I did actually send this boulder in the end. Ouch. But I didn't have a video of it because Cedar forgot to record it. So instead, we can watch Cedar's top out and Cedar's send of it, which is way better, of course, anyway. Now, Frank's slide is very exposed, so we really did not like climbing there when it was sunny out. But when the sun was going down or it was cloudy, there's just endless limestone boulders there, and just an amazing place to climb. I've put this one at number 2 because of the setting, because of the movements, and because of my own personal journey on it. Yeah, so was there really any doubt as to what the number 1 boulder in the V4 grade range in Canada is? Because it's the best boulder in V4, top 100, in the best climbing place in Canada. And yeah, Tai Fighter, it's just got this most incredible feature that you can see, and Cedar's demonstrating the amazing movements that one has on it. The reality is that it's soft at V4, and it should probably be V3, but it's just stuck at V4 now, and it's the best of all of the ones I've tried that are given that grade. This was Cedar's rest day, and so she did do a few V4s for me because I was too scared to do them. Then everybody was encouraging me to give it a try, but the start is really spooky because there's a huge hole there. And so I eventually did have a go on it once figuring out the movements, and this is kind of like my second attempt. And if I can do it this quickly, kind of like Minisutra, with these big movements, with good holds, it's probably soft at the V4 level. But I'm not going to complain because it's still one of my proudest sends from the fear factor, and also just because it's such an absolute classic. I think if you had to climb one V4 boulder in all of Canada in your life, then you should definitely climb Tai Fighter. So that's it for the top 20 countdown, and I just couldn't resist putting in 5 honorable mention boulders, which you can see coming up now. And those are a little bit more subjective, I think, than some of the ones on this top 20 list. Oh, that was entirely... Easy in an easy chair is a top 100 in Squamish, one of the most commonly attempted boulders in V4 in all of Squamish. Truth is, I hate it. I think it really sucks. I haven't even been able to send it myself, and it's so polished now that it's probably quite different from the original grade. So I was really psyched to find this other boulder while wandering around in a different sector of Squamish that is essentially the same problem, but moving the other direction. It's a bit longer, and the holds are in much better condition. They're not polished like easy in an easy chair. And so I actually think now this is a much, much better problem than easy in an easy chair. It's also got a number of other really nice things going for it. It's in a much quieter area, so you don't have endless people trooping by. And the forest is just as nice here as in the other location. Great landings. Just a nice forest setting on these north wall boulders. Both Cedar and I sent this boulder, and so I've got my send here as well, just for the sake of 2 alternative betas. But I also wanted to use this as an opportunity to comment on the top 100s that are in the Squamish book. Some of them are really incredible, but other ones I feel are pretty disappointing. Most obvious among those would be Shots Fired, which is right on the highway, and it's got this really ridiculous initial move that's extremely height dependent. And so some of these top 100 seem to stick on the top 100 list for a long time for no particular reason. Personally, I guess Easy and Easy Chair should stay there just because of the classic nature of it, but Shots Fired should be kicked off in favor of something else. There are so many amazing problems in the Boulderfields, but I gotta highlight this relatively obscure one, Branden's Nose. And here I am flying the drone in to Branden's Nose, which I'm sitting beside right there. Now, it's essentially a horizontal fridge problem. So you start off on a vertical part of a fridge, and then you transition to an almost completely horizontal fridge compression problem. For me, with my height, it's relatively straightforward to find the good positions and then just do massive movements where you maintain body compression right up against the surface of the fridge itself, and then transition around to the top out. Once you grab this hold around here, then it's pretty straightforward. Might be harder if you're shorter, I'm not sure, but I loved it. And you can see here, once I get this, I know I've got it made, and I'm just resting for half a second before struggling up on the top out. I don't think I was really expecting to get here this quickly and easily, and so I had to pause for a second and gather myself. Okay, Immaculate is one of the most famous and most climbed V4s in Niagara. It's basically just a few moves off of little pockets and a dyno to the top, and that's it. It's actually reasonably hard at V4 because the feet are really bad, and the book describes, slipping off it a lot in frustration. But it's kind of a fun problem, and it's kind of a must-do within the Niagara Glen. Here's a pretty weird one in Duncan. It's a slab with a really funky gym-style start. The landing is pretty bad, and I was really kind of afraid to break an ankle here. I've certainly done that several times. But I figured out a set of moves that made it pretty accessible for me. In particular, as you'll see here in a minute, there's a high right-hand foot that enables the big reach to the top. So people might not expect to see this one in a top 20 set, and of course it's not. It's an honorable mention, but I just thought it was a really cool, unique boulder in a really nice setting that's kind of far away, so you kind of have to really go out of your way to get to this one. I liked it. Yeah, so given that this is the honorable mentions only, I felt I had a bit of leeway to put in one of my own boulders. This is one that I discovered at Val-David in Quebec. And it's just a few moves, but it's got these really amazing bad slopers to move off. And I cleaned it off, sent it, invited some other folks to give it a try. I think it's similar to Eurythmix V5, which is one of the classics, but I think it's actually harder than Eurythmix, at least for me. Nonetheless, it's a V4, which is the consensus grade for it. Eurythmix is V5, although I think it's more like V4. But anyway, this is a nice problem. There's also a lower start that's a V7, and it's in the new Val-David book. So there you have it. Here's another view of the send. That was really cool slopers and a big move there, which is not height dependent. And that's it.